Hello, traveler of the quiet hours. I am the storyteller. And if you're here, it means you're seeking a voice to carry you into the darkness just long enough to forget the world behind your eyelids. Before we begin, take a breath. Like the video, subscribe to the channel, and tell me, where in the world are you watching from, and what time is it now? Are you ready? Then close your eyes. Because I'm about to take you somewhere forgotten. The smell reached me first, not the kind of rot that clings to time and wood, but sharper, more sterile. Metallic, like wet pennies or something left too long beneath the tongue of a storm. I stood at the threshold of the storage building, no longer a place of nostalgia, but something more solemn. The rusted key I'd used to unlock the door had resisted, groaning in protest, as though the building remembered what I had forgotten. Light filtered in crookedly through the warped slats of cedar siding. Not golden, but dust-heavy and pale, like a memory that refuses to be remembered properly. The air inside had that charged stillness of a room waiting too long without a name spoken within it. 30 years had passed since I'd last stepped foot inside. I'd been 14. A boy with too many questions and a father with no answers. Back then, I'd fled the sharp edges of family arguments, escaped to this quiet shell where wine sighed through the limestone cracks and the scorpion stayed polite if you stayed still. But now I was 30 and back again, with keys instead of excuses and an inheritance instead of hope. The main ranch house had caved in on itself in the years since my grandfather died. The barn leaned like it had grown tired of pretending to be useful. And yet, this old storage place remained. Preserved. Too preserved. The wood beneath my boots moaned like something mourning, but it held. I stepped into the hollow, my breath catching in my throat, not from the dust, but from something colder, deeper. As if the building had just taken its first breath in 3 decades, and I had interrupted the exhale. My phone vibrated in my pocket. A text. Jake, my cousin. Found the records you asked about. Grave was moved in '89. Confederate soldier. Ezekiel Morse. Used to be buried near the east fence line. I blinked. 1989, I would have still been here. Riding bikes through the cedar brush, carving my name into rain-softened sandstone. Why are you asking? He followed up. I didn't answer right away. Because I didn't know how to explain the things that don't fit in texts. Like why the air in this place felt too dense to breathe. Or why I could hear floorboards sighing even when I stood still. I set up camp in the middle of the room, a sleeping bag, battery lantern, a portable heater I barely trusted. The idea was to stay a few nights. Get reacquainted with the space. See if it could be salvaged. I told myself it was practical. That I could turn this place into a writer's retreat. But even as I told myself that, I knew something else was happening. When the sun dropped below the hills, the shadows inside changed texture. Not darker, thicker. They seemed to move when I wasn't looking directly at them. I wrote it off. Fatigue. Memory. Drafts. Until I heard the scrape. Metal across wood. Slow. Rhythmic. Scrape. Pause. Scrape. Pause. At first, I thought it might be a tree limb caught in the wind. But there was no wind. And the sound was too precise. Too deliberate. I stood up, flashlight in hand, and the sound stopped immediately. The beam scanned the far wall, nothing. Only dust, and boards worn smooth with age. I returned to my sleeping bag. The scraping resumed. This time closer. I slept poorly. The next morning, I found faint impressions on the floor, arcs of movement carved just beneath the layer of dust. Not boot prints. Not animal tracks. More like drag marks. Parallel, rhythmic, as if something had been circling the room while I slept. I told myself I was overreacting. Until I found the first coin. A silver spur. Small. Half buried beneath a floorboard I must have stepped over a dozen times. It was warm to the touch. Too warm. I lifted the board, and found more. A hollow cavity. Lined with old straw, bits of leather. And nestled at the center, a second spur, still bound with a strap marked by an insignia I didn't recognize. Spanish, maybe. Or older. The metal was dark, but not corroded. Beautiful, yes, but terrible, too. The moment I touched both spurs together, the house fell silent. And I mean silent. No insects. No wind. Not even the distant hum of cattle that should have grazed the lower pasture. Just absence. And then the scraping began again, this time from beneath the floorboards. That night, I dreamt of footsteps outside. Bare. Slow. Circling. I woke with the distinct sense that someone had been standing over me, waiting for me to open my eyes. The air was so still I could hear my own heartbeat thudding in my ears. I checked the cameras I'd set up, motion triggered, night vision equipped. The footage showed nothing for hours. Then, at 3:03 a.m., the camera in the southeast corner caught movement. A figure. Blurred. Tall. Gaunt. It didn't walk. It slid. Its arms hung unnaturally low. It paused by my sleeping bag, leaned down, as if listening to my breath, and then disappeared, not by walking away, but by folding into the floor, as if the boards had opened for it like a mouth. The next day I found claw marks, not scratches, not scuffs, but gouges. On the inside of the door. From the inside. I wanted to leave. I should have left. But I couldn't. Because somewhere in the back of my mind, I'd begun to remember things I wasn't sure were real. Like an old man's voice humming at night. Like waking up as a child to find a line of pennies laid out across my chest. Like dreaming in spirals. I texted Jake again. Did Grandpa ever say anything about this building? His reply was short. He told me never to go inside. Said it wasn't just storage. Said it was a place to hold something still. Hold what still? I didn't ask. Because I was beginning to hear voices in the night. Not words. Just breathing. Close. Right behind my ear. Eventually, I convinced myself I had imagined it, perhaps a trick of acoustics, or my memory giving shape to ambient noise. I returned to my laptop, willing myself into fiction, trying to finish a sentence about a character who was returning home. But the building wouldn't allow fiction. Not anymore. 20 minutes later, it started again. This time, I didn't move. I let the sound wash over me like cold water, a slow, deliberate scraping, metal against wood, followed by a pause. Then again. Scrape. Pause. Scrape. Pause. It was moving. From the east wall, across the length of the room. I counted, 7. Always 7. Then silence, an unnatural, anticipatory stillness. For minutes and 37 seconds later, it began again. From the same starting point. As if someone, something, was pacing. Rehearsing. I spent the rest of the night lying still inside my sleeping bag, documenting each event in a notebook I kept beside me. I didn't dare turn on the flashlight. I was afraid light might make it aware of me. The building had become an instrument, and something was plucking the same sequence over and over. 7 scrapes. Silence. Again. Just before dawn, it stopped. Not faded out, stopped. Abrupt, clean, like a door slamming shut in the middle of a whisper. When I woke near noon, the house was quiet again. Sunlight cut dusty ribbons through the cracks in the siding. And for a moment, I truly believed it had all been a dream, until I saw the notebook. Every page filled. Every timestamp written in my own hand. Not just observations, diagrams, arrows, notes about direction, intensity, intervals. Whatever was happening, it was real. That afternoon, I drove to Fredericksburg and stocked up motion-activated cameras, a digital recorder, extra batteries, a new EMF detector. My hands shook as I loaded the gear into the truck. Jake called while I was tossing in cables. His voice was quieter than usual, like someone calling from the edge of a confession. "You know, there might be a reason Grandpa never talked about moving that grave," he said. "What kind of reason?" "My dad told me once, offhand, like a joke, but the old guys around here, the ones who remembered that Confederate soldier, Ezekiel Morse, they said he wasn't easy to forget. Even after they buried him." "What does that mean?" "Persistent?" Jake hesitated. "Said he didn't rest." Ranch hand started seeing a figure out near the old fence line. Just walking the property. Over and over. Looking for something. When was that? Late 80s. Early 90s. Right after they moved him. And then? Jake's voice dropped to a whisper, though I don't know why. They just stopped talking about it. That night, I returned to the building. But this time, I came prepared. I set up the motion cameras in each corner. Placed the EMF detector on a salvaged oak table from the main house. Left the recorder in the center, near where the energy had felt strongest the night before. The air grew cold before the sound returned. My breath misted just after 11:45 p.m. The scraping started at 11:47. But this time, I had proof. The digital recorder picked up everything. Not just the scraping, no. There were textures in the sound I'd missed before. The subtle rustle of fabric. The creak of worn leather bending. And faintly, unmistakably, metal against metal. Spurs. Someone was walking the floor wearing spurs. Measured. Ritualistic. Pacing the same 7 steps again and again. The EMF detector went wild during each cycle. The needle slammed into the red zone and stayed there, vibrating with such intensity one thought the casing might shatter. But every time I checked the cameras, nothing. They showed the room empty, undisturbed, even though the timestamps lined up perfectly with the audio. The building was alive with energy, but invisible to light. Each pacing loop centered around my sleeping area, as if whatever walked was orbiting me. Studying. On the third night, something changed. I woke to a soft tapping. Not a scrape, a drip. Like water falling rhythmically from a faucet. But when I turned on my flashlight, I saw no leak. The sound was coming from above. I raised the beam. From the support beam overhead, something dark was seeping from the old iron nail heads. Not water. Too thick. Too slow. The liquid was nearly black, glistening in the light like fresh oil. It dripped to the floor, pooling around the edge of my sleeping bag, and then spreading outward. Boot prints. Not stains. Shapes. Precise, clean outlines of boots, forming a perfect ring around where I lay. They weren't mine. The scraping resumed, but now from above. From the rafters. 7 slow, dragging steps. The EMF detector screamed. The needle buried itself into the red, then flatlined. The air thrummed like a struck tuning fork. I tried to call Jake, but my phone remained unresponsive, black screen, even though it showed full battery earlier that afternoon. I checked the cameras. All batteries were dead. Only the audio recorder worked. And it kept recording. Scraping. Dripping. Jingles. Sometimes even the faint rasp of breath. I stayed awake until dawn. Too afraid to sleep. The spurs kept circling overhead. The prints around my sleeping bag began to dry, cracked like old blood under heat. The next morning, I listened to the entire recording. Around 3:11 a.m., buried in the background noise, a voice whispered, barely audible. 3 words. Give it back. I didn't know what it meant. But I had a feeling the house did. And that night, I would learn exactly what it wanted returned. I sat upright in the center of my sleeping bag, the notebook open beside me, its pages fluttering slightly in the draftless air. Around me, the boot prints had reappeared. Fresh, rust-colored arcs encircling my position like a ritual drawn in blood and time. They glistened faintly, not wet, but recent. Their form was too deliberate to dismiss. Each step was angled precisely, the heel indent deeper than the toe, as if someone, or something, had paused each time it turned the corner of its silent vigil. Above me, the rafters groaned. Not with wind. Not with age. With weight. Something was pacing again. But it wasn't just walking now. It was waiting. And when I turned off my lantern, the darkness didn't settle. It pressed in, thick and conscious, like velvet soaked in breath. By morning, the boot prints were gone, evaporated, as they had each night. Only a faint discoloration remained, like the ghost of rust or blood or both. I told myself it was natural, condensation, decay, tannins from the aged wood. But I had seen them form. And I knew that wood didn't bleed. That afternoon, I drove into town and took refuge in the public library's cramped, dust-smelling archives. I wasn't even sure what I was looking for, but I couldn't stop turning the name over in my mind, Ezekiel Morse. Each syllable felt heavier now. Not like a name, like a curse. The town's digital system had nothing. But a handwritten cattle drive journal from 1867 yielded a single entry. Morse, Ezekiel. Veteran. Good with horses. Walks the perimeter every night. Storm took him, lightning strike on the southern ridge. Buried fast. Spurs and all. That last line stopped me cold. Spurs and all. Not removed. Not cleaned. Buried just as he'd died. I copied the line into my notebook and circled it twice. When Grandpa moved the grave in 1989, had he disturbed the bones? Or had something been left behind? Something small. Overlooked. Something missing. That evening, I returned to the building with a metal detector I'd borrowed from an old rancher named Tom who didn't ask questions. He just handed it to me with a look I couldn't read, part warning, part sympathy. When I turned it on inside the building, it began chirping immediately. Not a steady alert, but rapid, overlapping beeps, like it was confused. The detector couldn't isolate a single source. I swept the room in a grid. North to south. East to west. No difference. It was as if the entire foundation held fragments of metal, or worse, as if something metallic was moving just beneath the surface, avoiding detection, but always nearby. That night, I changed my routine. No more sleeping in the center. I placed my sleeping bag near the east wall, the place where the scraping always began. If something was trying to show me a pattern, I would meet it where it began. The night turned early. At 10:07 p.m., the first sound came, not the rhythmic pacing I had grown grimly accustomed to, but something more deliberate. One single, unbroken scraping, like a spur dragged slowly across a hardwood coffin lid. It lasted almost a full minute. Then silence. Then, steps. Not ghostly or distant, but heavy. Spurs on wood. Approaching me directly. The floorboards shuddered under my spine. My EMF detector, once a shrieking, blinking mess, went dead silent. Not off. Not broken. Smothered. Even the air stopped moving. Something stood 3 feet from me. I could feel it, not as temperature, but pressure, like air displaced by a large object that had no visible mass. I closed my eyes. And felt it. A touch, cold as a dead man's breath, pressed against my forehead. Not a push, not a claw. Just fingertips. Soft. Commanding. And then, visions. A flood of images that bypassed language and memory. I saw the building as it had been in 1867, newly constructed, fresh pines still yellow and clean. Lamplight flickered across the floor. The air was thick with horses and sweat and tobacco. I saw him, Ezekiel. He looked like me, or rather, like what I might become. Hardened, hollow-eyed, kneeling beside a loose board near the east wall. He was hiding something beneath it. A pouch. Small. Heavy. And inside, silver that glinted like moonlight off wet bone. Not money. The spurs. His most prized possession. I don't know how I understood it, but I knew. They weren't just decorative. They were talismans, symbols of identity, of honor, of penance. And when he was buried without them, when the ground lost the weight of those worn symbols, it unmoored his spirit. He had been searching for them ever since. When I came back to myself, the room was silent again. The presence gone. The air cool. I opened my eyes, heart pounding. The EMF detector flickered back to life. Weakly. Uncertain. I stood and crossed to the wall in the vision. The east wall. My breath quickened. My palms sweat. I knelt and ran my fingers along the seams between the boards. And there, loose. The same board from the vision. I pried it up with the edge of my hunting knife. And beneath it, nothing. But deeper, beneath a second layer of older wood, I saw the edge of something tarnished. Silver. Curved like the edge of a spur rowel. The buried memory of a dead man. Still waiting. I crawled toward the east wall, hands trembling as they brushed over uneven wood. One board stood out, raised slightly, the edge worn smoother than its neighbors, like it had been pried up many times before by many different hands. Maybe even mine, in another life. My fingernails dug into the groove, and with a shiver that passed bone deep, I lifted it. A hollow was cut into the limestone beneath the floor, old, deliberate, smoothed by time. Nestled inside were a pair of silver spurs. But these weren't relics. They were artifacts. Tarnished and darkened by decades, yet still gleaming beneath the beam of my flashlight. Spiraling metalwork looped through the rowels, delicate, intentional, cruelly beautiful. Spanish colonial style, unmistakable. The light fractured off their curves, throwing erratic silver spirals across the wall, like glyphs projected from another language. And then... silence. Not just quiet. Absence. No wind. No creak. No insects. The very sound of the earth stopped, as if the land itself had paused to watch what I would do next. Even my breath felt like an intrusion. I touched the spurs. They were warm. Not ambient temperature warm. Not sun on metal warm. Alive. And in that moment, I understood something I had been resisting since the first scrape, the first circle, the first midnight pacing across floorboards not walked in over 30 years. The rhythm hadn't been meant to frighten me. It had been guiding me. Ezekiel Morse hadn't simply haunted this place. He had waited. Not for anyone. For me. Not out of vengeance, but out of recognition. I sat there, the spurs heavy in my palms, the world holding its breath around me, and a thought crept in, soft, but undeniable. What if I didn't just find what he lost? What if I found what had been looking for me? I thought about the summers I'd spent here as a boy, hidden in this building like a secret. How peaceful it had felt. How drawn I was to this very corner, how I'd slept soundly in a room that now refused sleep. How the disturbances had started only after I returned, but what if it had been the other way around? What if the disturbances had ended when I left? As if something had gone silent because I was no longer here to hear it. As if the rhythm had stopped because its listener, the one it had marked, was gone. And now I was back. 30 years older. Just in time. The spurs grew impossibly heavy. My wrists trembled. Something wasn't just near me now, it was inside. Not possession. Not horror. Emerging. Like a song remembered from before birth. A memory that didn't belong to me, but recognized me just the same. I wasn't holding the spurs. They were holding me. They had always been mine. Or his. And somewhere along the line, the difference had ceased to matter. Outside, an owl called once, a dry, metallic shriek that echoed through the trees like rust tearing open hardwood. I jolted upright. It was the exact sound I'd heard each night, the one I'd attributed to spurs scraping floorboards. But what if that wasn't Ezekiel? What if it was me? Or a version of me that had stayed behind, pacing for 30 years, waiting for this version to return? The flashlight trembled in my grip, casting dancing symbols on the walls, spirals, like those carved into forgotten stones, like the coils of a serpent, like the grooves of a record waiting to be played. I looked around the room, now alien and familiar in equal measure. The floor whispered beneath me. Not in words, but in pressure. In breath. This place didn't feel haunted anymore. It felt inhabited. And not by something that wanted to leave. But something that had been waiting to reunite. I could no longer say for certain which of my memories belonged to me. Which were Ezekiel's. Or if we had ever truly been two different people. The question lingered like fog clinging to old timber. Were the spurs his? Or were they always mine? And what did it mean that I'd finally returned to claim them? In the last flicker of the flashlight's beam, they glinted once more. Silver spirals. Just like the ones I'd drawn in the margins of my schoolbooks as a kid. Just like the ones carved into old headstones on forgotten hillsides. Just like the ones etched into the inside of the floorboard I'd lifted. The message wasn't unclear. I was home. Or we were. And we would never be separated again. Music had always been my sanctuary. My tether. And perhaps, naively, I believed grandfather's house could become that too. It was quiet here. Too quiet. The kind of quiet that presses against the walls like it's listening. The kind of quiet that feels curated, designed to reveal something if you stay still long enough. I didn't notice it at first. The first week passed like any other. I'd return from my mundane job at the insurance office, 8 hours of denying claims and nodding politely, and step into a different world. A world suspended in amber. Dinners were brief, barely meals. I cooked in silence and ate beside windows bathed in the orange tones of a dying day. Then I played. Always alone. Always late. And always watched, by 4 high-definition cameras I'd placed in the corners of the parlor. They were meant for YouTube. For posterity. For some kind of proof that I still existed in the language that mattered to me, music. If the world didn't want to hear my songs, would teach it how to listen. The footage was mundane at first. A man. A guitar. A parlor lost in time. I'd glance up occasionally, half smiling at the cameras, still not used to the idea that I wasn't truly alone. Still aware that some part of the house might always belong to him. It was the rocking chair that changed everything. That cursed chair. An oak relic that grandfather insisted helped him think, its curves smoothed by decades of use. I'd tried to avoid including it in the shot. Something about its emptiness unnerved me. It was too heavy with memory, too charged with absence. But in my 4th video, it slipped in, just barely at the edge of the frame. A blurred shape in the periphery. And it moved. As I played a melancholy piece, a personal elegy to everything I'd lost, the chair began to rock. Slowly. Deliberately. In perfect rhythm. I froze mid-note. And the chair, as if in response, rocked once more before gradually falling still. The silence that followed wasn't natural. It was expectant. Like something had been waiting for me to notice. I reviewed the footage the next morning, heart pounding. There it was, rocking gently behind me. No wind. No draft. Just motion without cause. My rational mind rebelled. I explained it away: temperature shifts, amplifier vibration, floorboard memory. But even as I listed these excuses, I was already afraid. Because deep down, I recognized the melody I had played. I'd called it an original, but it wasn't truly mine. The core motif, the downward steps, the resolution in a suspended minor, had always been there, buried like a splinter in my subconscious. It was his. The same song grandfather had hummed in that chair night after night. A tune with no beginning and no end. A song shaped like a spiral. Always returning to itself. I couldn't have recreated it if I'd tried. But I hadn't tried. It had simply emerged. On the fifth night, I pushed back. I chose a bright, percussive tune in a major key. Quick strums. High tempo. Joyful. It had nothing of grandfather in it. And the chair didn't move. Not once. The air stayed flat. The parlor remained cold, but inert. No whispers. No shifts. Just the house watching. Only when I finished and reached lazily for my case did my fingers, unbidden, slide back across the strings. The opening phrase slipped out like breath. And the chair responded. Immediately. It rocked forward and back, slow and patient, like the ticking of a long-forgotten clock. And the air changed. I saw my breath for the first time, faint clouds rising in front of me, though no window was open. The camera's lights dimmed, pulling back into the walls like eyes narrowing. The room receded, and I felt the darkness swell. Still, I played. Because some part of me wanted to hear it again. The melody was evolving. Deepening. Folding in on itself. Chords I hadn't planned found their way beneath my fingers. Notes stretched into shapes I didn't know I knew. It wasn't mine. And it wasn't grandfather's anymore either. It was ours. A duet across time and skin. The chair creaked louder, but not with decay. With rhythm. With intention. And just beneath the sound of wood and string, I heard something else. Breath. Not mine. Soft. Ragged. Present. I stopped. My hands froze mid-phrase. The breath paused with me. And then I heard it again, closer this time. Behind me. Just over my shoulder. The faint, unmistakable inhale of someone listening. I turned slowly. Deliberately. As if speed might offend whatever was standing just behind me. But there was nothing. Nothing visible, at least. Only the chair. Still. Heavy. Waiting. The air around it felt denser than before, like the aftermath of thunder. A pressure that lingered in the chest, under the ribs. My breath snagged halfway out, and for a terrifying moment, I wondered if I'd ever exhale again. Then came the whisper. A sound without language. Like a bow drawn too slowly across a frayed violin string. Not music. But memory made audible. I stepped back, knees trembling. The chair didn't move. Not physically. But it felt different now, fuller. As if something had chosen to sit after standing for too long. As if something had accepted my invitation and settled into the seat. I shut everything down, guitar, lights, cameras. I backed out of the room without turning my back, heart hammering like a second metronome in my chest. That night, I couldn't sleep. My bedroom, though upstairs and far from the parlor, seemed to echo with the faint ghost of that unfinished melody. It chased me through dreams I couldn't fully remember, dreams of old photographs smiling too wide, of locked doors with humming keyholes, of hands that weren't mine moving across familiar strings. By morning, my hands ached. Like I'd played all night. I checked the footage. The cameras showed me leaving the parlor at 2:13 a.m. As expected. But at 3:06 a.m., something strange happened. One camera, facing the now darkened parlor, glitched. The image warped briefly, then returned to normal. And there, in the rocking chair, the shadows had shifted. The room was empty, but the lighting told a different story. The faint outline of someone sitting. Faint. Imperfect. But unmistakably shaped like a man. Head bowed. Shoulders hunched. Hands resting on knees. And though the figure never moved, the chair rocked. Forward. Back. Perfect time. I stared at the screen, breath shallow. The frame flickered again at 3:44 a.m. And the figure was gone. I didn't record again for several days. Not because I didn't want to, but because I was afraid that I did. Something in me longed to play that melody again. To finish it. Complete the thought grandfather had started and left incomplete in his humming. But each time I so much as tuned my guitar, the air seemed to tilt. Pictures leaned on the walls. Dust swirled in corners like breath catching its footing. The house was listening. By the following Sunday, I gave in. I set everything up as before, but this time, I aimed one camera directly at the chair. No hiding. If it wanted to be seen, I would see it. I started to play, not grandfather's song, but a variation. One that had haunted me all week. I added chords, inverted intervals, leaned into dissonance where he had once smoothed the edges. The chair responded instantly. But not with rocking. It groaned. The wood strained, creaked, cracked, as if something too heavy had collapsed into it. My fingers faltered, but only for a second. The music wouldn't let me stop. The chair's back tilted, slowly, like someone shifting position. And just behind the melody, in the gaps between notes, a whisper emerged. Clearer now. A voice. Not grandfather's. Mine. But older. Tired. Hollowed out by grief and years and knowledge I hadn't yet lived. It spoke a single phrase, barely more than a breath carried on the strings of my guitar. Don't stop this time. And I didn't. Not for hours. Not even when my fingers bled and the strings wore grooves into my skin. Not even when the house itself began to sing. The walls vibrated with low harmonics. The window panes shimmered with sympathetic resonance. The floorboards tapped along in soft, uneven rhythms, like footsteps with a limp. And beneath it all, that same whisper kept threading through. Don't stop. Don't stop. Don't. And in that moment, standing ankle-deep in dust and breathless wonder, I realized something unthinkable. Grandfather had never stopped writing. Not when his hands stiffened with age. Not when death supposedly claimed him in his chair. Not even now. Especially not now. The air in the basement pulsed with the hush of hidden breath. The pages on the walls rustled softly, not from wind, but from resonance. A subtle harmonic rising from the stillness, vibrating the ink like a finger drawn around the lip of a crystal glass. Melody for the living. Over and over again. Same title. Different arrangements. Some mournful. Some rapturous. Others written in impossible keys or alternate notational systems I didn't recognize, sigils shaped like music, or music shaped like something else. I reached for the nearest page. It was warm. Not metaphorically. Not emotionally. Warm. As if freshly placed. As if the ink had yet to dry. I tilted the page under the dim basement light. In the margins were annotations, cryptic and scrawled with increasing urgency. She hears it now. The chair must turn before the door opens. They're not echoes. They're rehearsals. If I forget, remind me of the cellar rhythm. 3/4/1/silence. And below it all, in a trembling but unmistakable hand. Play it again. The whole house is listening. I took a step back, heart pounding. My mind scrambled to connect this revelation with the nights of music, the phantom orchestra, the chair, the humming, my own lost time. The implications towered like black columns above me. This wasn't just a haunting. It wasn't even memory. This was composition as ritual. Song as bridge. Music not just heard, but inhabited. I turned slowly, scanning the shelves, the floors, the heavy beams overhead. It was more than a collection. It was a conductor's chamber, an archive of living scores, written by a man who had somehow, through melody or madness, tuned himself into something beyond. A tremor passed through the floor. Just a faint vibration. But I recognized the rhythm. 3, 4, 1. Silence. The same sequence written in the margins. I looked toward the far corner of the basement. And there, behind an open bookcase, a second door. I had no memory of this door. It hadn't been on the blueprints. It wasn't in the family stories. And yet, it waited. Framed in peeling red paint. Locked with a tarnished brass handle shaped like a treble clef. Above it, etched in the wall itself. The second movement. I backed away, chest tight with an emotion I couldn't name. Not fear. Not awe. Something deeper. A recognition. Somewhere, in the hollow of my ribs, I felt it echoing, a note unplayed but long anticipated. I left the basement. But not for long. Not forever. That night, I sat in the parlor with the cameras on, the lights dimmed to their lowest setting, and the chair carefully positioned to face me. I didn't speak. I didn't test. I listened. And then I played. Not grandfather's melody this time. Mine. A slow, aching movement shaped by what I'd found below, built from shadows and silence and rooms that remember you better than you remember yourself. And as I played, I heard it again, that chorus of invisible musicians, rising to meet me. But this time, the humming didn't come from the chair. It came from underneath the floorboards. And it was not alone. Then breathe deeply. And descend with me. Not into darkness. But into the rest between the notes. The second movement, the room that heard you first. The next evening, I didn't hesitate. I descended the basement stairs barefoot, guitar in hand, each step resonating like a distant drumbeat. The air was cooler than before, not cold, but expectant. As though the walls had inhaled and were waiting for the release. The sheet music no longer fluttered. They hung silent and still, like witnesses at a funeral long delayed. The second door waited at the far end. Still sealed. Still humming. When my fingers touched the treble clef handle, I felt it click, not as a lock disengaging, but like a note falling into place. The door didn't creak. It exhaled. And then it opened. The room beyond was impossible. Wider than the foundation. Taller than the house. A domed chamber of polished wood, carved with overlapping spirals that pulsed softly with a golden glow. Floating shelves of aged sheet music drifted like leaves on windless air. In the center stood a single music stand made of iron and glass, upon which rested a blank score. No staff. No notes. Only a page of possibility. I stepped inside. The moment my foot crossed the threshold, the walls responded. A faint harmonic shimmer, like the sympathetic resonance of strings when a nearby note is played. They recognized me. Not just me, but my lineage. The room was not built for performing. It was built for remembering. I approached the music stand and set my guitar beside it. My fingers hovered over the blank page. And I heard her. Grandmother's voice. Soft. Melodic. Speaking words I hadn't heard since childhood, if ever. Not a song. Not a phrase. A tone. One I'd used, unknowingly, in the bridge of a piece I'd written at age 14. One my grandfather had hummed, circling the same theme every evening. One etched into the spirals of the walls in this very room. This room had recorded us. It had preserved us. Every composition. Every hesitation. Every unfinished lullaby. Every breath taken before a note. All still here. Waiting. I placed my fingers on the strings and began to play. This time, the melody came not from me, but through me. I was the instrument now. The room filled with sound. Not music, exactly. Memory. My mother's quiet weeping after the funeral. My grandfather's laughter while tuning a broken radio. The crackle of vinyl records. The click of a lighter in the dark. The long exhale of grief held too long in the lungs. It wasn't beautiful. It was true. The blank page on the stand slowly filled itself in as I played, lines appearing in curling ink, the notation elegant and unfamiliar, like the ghost of a forgotten language I'd somehow always spoken. Then, as the final chord hung suspended in the chamber, the spirals on the wall began to shift, no longer glowing gold, but flickering with pale blue light, like heat leaving a body. A soft whisper curled around my ears, not spoken aloud but written into the room itself. Now you may ask. I swallowed hard. And I asked the question I hadn't known I'd carried since I was a child. Why me? There was no voice in answer. Only vibration. The stand began to hum. The score turned to ash. The room dimmed. And then, in a moment of absolute clarity, I understood. It had always been me. Not by blood. Not by skill. But by resonance. I had tuned myself to this house across a lifetime. Every lost note. Every unfinished song. Every silence I had filled with sound. The house had listened. And now it remembered. I turned to leave, carrying nothing but memory and the hollow echo of chords I could no longer play. When I stepped out, the basement seemed smaller. More ordinary. The sheet music on the walls had vanished. The camera lights upstairs flickered back on. And in the parlor, the rocking chair was still. But on the side table beside it, a new page. Title, Final Refrain for the Living. Notation, blank. Just a single line at the bottom. Play this when you're ready to leave. The walls pulsed faintly in time with the sound, shadows stretching and recoiling like lungs breathing in resonance. My eyes welled with tears, not from sadness, but from a sense of being fully seen, fully known, by something I had long thought lost to time and death. The chair creaked once, gently. Not from motion, but acknowledgement. And then his voice came again, not aloud, but within me, like a thought too large to contain. There's more than memory here, grandson. There's legacy. There's listening. The air shimmered. I felt the vibration of unseen instruments, violins gliding on threads of sorrow, cellos weeping slow truths, a piano unfolding chords like distant thunder softened by time. My grandfather and I, divided by death but united by melody, were not merely collaborating on music. We were weaving reality. The music we composed together wasn't confined to sound waves or sheet paper. It was imprinting itself onto the house, rearranging the fibers of the wood, the angles of light, the silence between footsteps. The very bones of the Victorian seemed to remember what we played. And they wanted more. Each night after that, I returned to the parlor at midnight. always alone. Never lonely. The melodies grew more ambitious, bending time signatures, creating progressions that felt like dreams stitched together. The sheet music reappeared each morning in the basement, as if inked by invisible hands, notations perfectly capturing what I had played, with comments that blended grandfather's old-fashioned flourishes with new ones I didn't recognize. One morning, I found a new message at the bottom of the page. Soon, others will hear it too. And they did. When I uploaded a video of our midnight sessions to my channel, it spread like wildfire. Thousands of views in hours. Then hundreds of thousands. People didn't just watch, they listened. And when they listened, they wept. The comments told a story I hadn't expected. My grandmother sang that tune when I was little. I haven't heard it in 30 years. I don't know how, but this song makes me remember someone I never met. I dreamed this exact melody last week. How did you know? This music healed something in me I didn't know was broken. Each response felt like an echo of the music that had filled the room, of the melodies that remembered us first. But the house was changing now. Doors that once stuck now opened easily. Stairs that creaked now sang. The rocking chair sometimes moved even when no music played, as if it were listening to a rhythm only it could hear. And one night, the music shifted. Not darker, but deeper. More ancient. More crowded. As I played, I felt the presence of more than just my grandfather. New harmonies emerged, shaped by voices I didn't know, but somehow recognized. A clarinet phrase that reminded me of my great-uncle's humming. A harp glissando echoing the lullabies my mother whispered when I had fevers as a child. A trumpet calling out like a question never answered in this life. And beneath it all, a low rumble of approval. The house was becoming an instrument. Not merely a setting, but a vessel. A bridge between those who remember, and those who are remembered. One night, the parlor lights dimmed and refused to return. Instead, the walls glowed faintly with lines of musical notation, scores I hadn't yet written. A map of melodies yet to come. A score of stories, waiting to be played into existence. And at the center of the room, a new music stand had appeared. This one made of stained glass and bone, etched with names I did not recognize. It held a blank page. Not paper. Parchment. Soft as skin. Still warm. And below it, in looping script I'd come to know better than my own. When you are ready, compose the final movement. But I haven't written it yet. Because once I do, the music ends. And I'll have to play it. And when I do, I know what will happen. The house will sing one last time. And the melody we've built, generation after generation, will fold in on itself like a final breath. A closing chord. A farewell too beautiful to bear. So for now, I keep playing. Because some bridges are too precious to cross only once. And some voices, even after death, deserve to be heard. Again. And again. And again. Until silence learns to sing. And in that final line, it only changes key, you've captured the essence of a haunting truth. This isn't a ghost story. It's a requiem in progress. A living elegy. A duet between memory and transformation, between the echo of a soul that refuses to fade and the fragile mind of one left behind, who maybe never truly left at all. You've crossed the threshold now. Your grandfather's music was never just a melody, it was an invocation. A bridge. A call and a response, threading time and identity into a composition so intricate, neither of you can tell where one ends and the other begins. What you've become isn't unnatural. It's inevitable. Some inherit houses. Some inherit debt. You inherited a symphony that remembers you back. And the house? It's no longer just wood and stone. It's a cathedral of remembrance, tuned to your lineage, humming in key with your soul. Every night you descend into the basement, you're not just writing music, you're writing existence. One measure at a time. One harmony deeper than the last. Maybe the cameras will one day catch nothing but an empty chair rocking alone. Maybe the guitar will play itself. Maybe the melody will outlive even your body. But that's the thing about music born of love and grief, of memory and the beyond. It doesn't stop. It modulates. Like grief itself. Like lineage. Like you. Story 3, The Hollow That Hungers for Names. The land was old, older than roads, older than fences, older than the names we gave it, and it remembered what we tried so hard to forget. I came to the hollow by accident, though the locals say no one does. If you find yourself there, the woman at the gas station muttered, eyes darting from my city plates to the tree lean, then something found you first. I laughed then, polite, dismissive. But her words stayed with me like a cold coin in the pocket of my thoughts. I hadn't meant to stop in the valley at all. The original plan had been a straight-shot drive, 3 states north to finalize my mother's estate. But a detour, a misread sign, a strangely uncooperative GPS, and suddenly I was winding through a nameless stretch of woodland, where the light filtered differently and every mile felt a little less real than the one before. I saw the sign at dusk. A crooked wooden marker, barely clinging to the last remnants of paint. It simply said, "Welcome to Ashford Hollow." But something about the way the letters curled, not printed but carved deep as if someone had scratched them in desperation, made my hands tighten around the wheel. There was no population listed beneath the town name. Just a second sign, smaller, dangling beneath the first like an afterthought. Leave a name. Take only silence. The motel was the only building that looked functional. Functional, being generous, it leaned like a tired drunk, its shutters askew, windows dusty with the breath of decades. But the neon sign above the office still flickered, rooms, vacancy, heat. The clerk didn't ask for my license. Didn't ask for my name. Just slid me a rusted key on a braided leather fob and said, "Room 6. Try not to speak after sundown." I wanted to ask why, but her eyes, gray, heavy, knowing, told me I'd regret it. The room smelled of lavender and rust. The wallpaper was the color of old bones. I left my suitcase untouched on the bed, choosing instead to step outside, drawn to the strange hush that blanketed the entire town like snow without cold. No dogs. No insects. Not even the hum of a distant engine. Just silence. And the woods. Thick and dark at the edge of town, ringed with crooked birches and a whisper of mist that never seemed to lift. The woman at the gas station had said something else as I left. It only takes what's freely given. Just don't give it your name. I hadn't understood then. But I would. Later. At 2:37 a.m., I woke to scratching. Not on the walls. Inside them. Rhythmic. Patient. Like something trapped, but not desperate. Curious. I sat up slowly, ears straining. No wind. No creaks. Just the steady scratch of fingernails on old wood and the faint sound of whispering in a voice that wasn't quite a voice. I leaned forward and whispered, "Hello?" The scratching stopped. The silence that followed was not empty, but watching. I didn't sleep again that night. By morning, I found footprints outside my window. Small. Bare. As though a child had been pacing back and forth through the gravel in the dead of night. But the clerk, when I asked, only said, "There haven't been children here since '83. No elaboration. No expression. I went to the diner across from the gas station. It had once been a real place, filled with people and warmth and the greasy aroma of hash browns and bottomless coffee. Now it was more like a set piece. A stage waiting for a play that would never be performed again. The man behind the counter was ancient, with a hollow around his eyes that seemed carved by something other than age. He poured my coffee before I asked. Poured cream I didn't request. Stirred without looking. "You dream yet?" he asked. I blinked. "Excuse me?" "You'll know when you do," he said. "Dreams don't lie here. They remember." I didn't finish my coffee. That night, I did dream. I dreamt of the woods surrounding Ashford Hollow. Not as they were, but as they had been long before people tried to name them. I walked between trees that pulsed with something alive beneath the bark. Roots shifted like sleeping serpents beneath the soil. And in the clearing, beneath a sky of impossible stars, there was a stone, flat and smooth and older than bones. Around it, names had been etched into the earth. Some legible. Most not. One of them was mine. I woke screaming, my mouth full of dirt. And outside the motel, the woods were whispering. The third day, I tried to leave. My car wouldn't start. Not a sputter. Not a click. Just a radio that turned on by itself and whispered fragments of my childhood in my mother's voice. Private moments. Forgotten lullabies. A fight I'd had with her at 16, word for word. And then a different voice. One I didn't know. One that knew me. "You've already given us so much," it said. "Just one more thing." I turned the key until my hand cramped. Nothing. Eventually, I walked back to room 6. The motel clerk was waiting on the porch. "You dreamed too loud," she said. I didn't say anything, I whispered. "No," she agreed, "but dreaming is a kind of speaking. And the hollow is always listening." I sat beside her on the warped wooden step. For the first time, I noticed the small black book in her lap. Names filled every line. I searched for mine. It wasn't there. Not yet. "You still have time," she said. "But not much." That night, the scratching came again. This time it wasn't from the walls. It was from inside me. I don't know how many days it's been now. Ashford Hollow doesn't keep time the way the rest of the world does. The sky moves, but the light never changes. The motel smells more like earth each morning. My reflection flickers at the edges, as if forgetting how to remember me. I haven't said my name in days. But I hear it, every night, called softly from the woods, like a lover returning home. I know what the hollow wants. Not my body. Not my soul. Just my name. Names are how we anchor. How we stay. Give the hollow your name, and you forget where you end. And where it begins. I sit now at the diner. The old man across from me hasn't moved in 20 minutes, but his eyes are still watching me, still waiting. Outside, the mist thickens. The coffee grows cold. The woods lean closer. I can hear it whispering through the birch leaves, offering to make me forget the grief, the debt, the endless noise of a world that never listened. All I have to do is speak my name. But I won't. Not yet. Because someone will come through this town again, by accident, by mistake, or by calling. And when they do, I'll be waiting. At the motel. Behind the desk. Braiding leather into old keychains. Waiting to ask. Room 6? Try not to speak after sundown. But my mind kept drifting. Each time my eyes landed on those swirling stone patterns, carved deep into megaliths weathered by 1,000 winters, I felt a strange resonance, like the spirals were turning inside me. Not metaphorically, but viscerally, a slow, coiling motion that churned behind my sternum, as if some echo of those symbols had been seated inside me and was beginning to stir. The fever returned just after sundown. I remember because the shadows in the flat began to stretch before the sun was fully gone. They moved as if the light had grown tired of holding them in place. I lit a candle beside my desk, more for comfort than necessity, and returned to my notes. That's when I noticed the writing. Not my own. Neater. Finer. Like etchings done by a jeweler's hand. Lines of text had appeared at the margins of my spiral diagram, ink that shimmered faintly in the candlelight. It wasn't English. Or Latin. But something more primal, older. I didn't recognize the script itself, but I knew the sound it made. I could hear it in my head, rising like a distant chant, like wind moving through stone hollows. A dry voice murmuring vowels no human throat was built to shape. I closed the notebook. I didn't open it again that night. I couldn't remember dreaming, but I woke with dirt under my fingernails and a dried smear of ash-gray powder along my forearm. There were 3 circles now. Each in a different room. And in the middle of the newest one, a tiny spiral had been etched into the floorboards, burned into the wood by some unseen hand. That was the moment I stopped pretending I was imagining things. I took Seamus's iron nail and tied it to a leather cord, wearing it around my neck. The moment it touched my chest, I felt a small pressure release behind my eyes, as if something had been leaning there, watching from inside, and was now recoiling. I tried to leave Dublin the next morning. Packed up my laptop, my hard drives, my journals. Left the flat key on the counter and booked a taxi to the airport. But when I arrived, my name wasn't on the airline manifest. I showed them my confirmation number. My ID. My payment records. None of it mattered. "You've never booked with us," the agent said, polite but insistent. "Are you certain you didn't imagine it? You've had quite a fever, sir." I stood there for 10 minutes, trying not to scream. Trying not to notice the spiral-shaped stain forming slowly on the floor beneath my boots. When I got back to the flat, the front door was already ajar. And the scent of moss and stone filled the air. I stopped sleeping. Stopped eating, mostly. The fever ebbed and flowed like the tide. Each time it peaked, I heard the chant more clearly. It always started with a single word. Tuairmí. Not Gaelic. Or at least, not recorded in any lexicon I could find. But I felt its meaning in my marrow. Binding. Entwining. The turning of all things. Each spiral I'd documented in the hills, they weren't just decorations. They were maps. Not geographic, but ritualistic. Pathways between forms, between what is and what lies beneath what is. Some of the circles even overlapped precisely with others when overlaid. When I mirrored 2 photos in particular, one from the Carrowkeel tombs and another from the Grange stone circle, they aligned perfectly, revealing a single, enormous spiral hidden in plain sight across the countryside. A symbol not drawn on stone, but through the land itself. That night, he came again. The man from the mirror. He stepped from the circle in my bedroom as if passing through a thin veil. The spiral scars on his skin glowed faintly, pulsing in time with my heartbeat. But this time, I didn't recoil. He raised a hand, not in threat, but invitation, and spoke the word again. Tuairmí. I repeated it before I could stop myself. The room darkened, candle flames bending inward like flowers to the sun. I felt the floor open, not literally, but spiritually, as if the entire flat had become a hinge, and I had been turned. What happened after is difficult to explain. It was not a dream. I found myself standing among stones that pulsed like living things. The sky above me churned with stars that didn't belong to any known constellation. My body felt lighter, stretched, as though time had loosened its grip on me. And around me, others stood. Figures with carved spiral markings, eyes like wet slate, mouths whispering the chant I'd heard for days. In unison, they turned toward me and spoke a phrase that vibrated in my teeth and bones. The circle opens to those who remember its shape. Then I was back. Flat. Cold. Fever breaking in waves as the candle sputtered its last breath. The iron nail around my neck had turned black. It's been 5 days since that night. No more fever. No more circles. But every now and then, when the flat is silent, I hear footsteps in the hallway, bare soles against wood, and the whisper of stone on stone. I don't answer the knock. Not yet. But I know he's still there. Waiting. Not to harm me, but to welcome me. Because I've remembered the spiral's true purpose. It was never meant to keep things out. It was meant to guide them in.